One, two, is this on? I'm actually skipping my standard introduction because I'm running behind this week. Instead, I'm just going to start talking about Watchmen. Watchmen is a concept that began when DC Comics bought the superhero characters from competitor company Charlton Comics. Charlton was a somewhat contender in comic books in the Silver Age, but pivoted to licensed properties in the early 70s. These included Hanna-Barbera characters, Beetle Bailey, Popeye, The $6 Million Man, Space 1999, and others. By the 80s, the company was in decline as Marvel and DC were solidifying themselves as the big two in the entire industry. In 1983, the bulk of the superhero characters owned by Charlton were sold to DC for $5,000 per character. This included characters such as Captain Atom, The Question, and Blue Beetle, all of whom were created by co-creator of Spider-Man, Steve Ditko, as well as Peacemaker, Judo Master, Steve Cannon Thunderbolt, and others. DC contracted their writer Alan Moore to introduce these characters into the new DC continuity after Crisis on Infinite Earths. Moore was already popular due to stories such as Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, the final Silver Age Superman story, and whose Swamp Thing run was putting that character on the map of public opinion. His early drafts, however, made it clear that those characters would be effectively unusable after the story. So DC offered to let Moore finish the story with unique characters, each modified to no longer be distinctly pre-existing, so that his work could still be used and they could still use those characters that they had paid for. They offered what was a standard contract at the time for the rights to the characters in the story to revert to Moore and to the artist Dave Gibbons 1 year after the characters, the story left publication. Moore commented at the San Diego Comic-Con that DC owns the rights for so long as they were publishing those characters, and 1 year after that, he and Dave Gibbons would be able to make money on merchandising. He specifically mentioned putting the characters on Slurpee cups. In 1986, he said that he understood that the characters would be used with his and Gibbons' interests in mind while they worked for DC, which he was fine with. But he also added that once the characters outlived their natural usage in the comics and DC want to do anything new with them, then a year after that point, he and Dave would reclaim the rights. Watchmen was planned to be a 12-issue limited series that began publication in May of '86. At that time, the concept of the limited series was still somewhat new, premise being that when the series released, it was advertised how many total issues there would be, and the expectation was delivered to the customers that the story would conclude at the end of the series. This was a concept first introduced by accident in 1982 with the Marvel Series Contest of Champions. I'll talk in greater detail about that in a future video, as the story is borderline insane. But Marvel followed that up with Secret Wars, a 12-issue series in '84. DC's Crisis was also a 12-issue limited series that began in '85 and ended March of '86, 2 months before the start of Watchmen. Again, Watchmen was originally supposed to fold the Charlton characters into DC's post-crisis continuity. The original story title was Who Killed the Peacemaker, but the story Moore wrote was not only not in anything remotely like the new DC continuity, where DC wanted to go with their regular characters, it ended the careers of all the characters involved. So it was published as a standalone tale disconnected from the rest of the DC publications. This had also been done for Alan Moore's story V for Vendetta prior. In addition, DC was leaning into the more mature audience that the Bronze Age of comics were courting by publishing Watchmen with a mature reader's label and featuring brief nudity and adult themes in the story. Watchmen received high praise, both in the creator community and in the fan base. Therefore, in 1987, Watchmen became one of DC's first 2 graphic novels, which were collected stories from comic books already published. The 2 were Moore's Watchmen and Frank Miller's Batman: The Dark Knight Returns. Alan Moore severed ties with DC when the Watchmen graphic novel went into reprint in '89. He said, and I quote, "Fair enough, you have managed to successfully swindle me, so I will never work for you again," unquote. I think this was a misunderstanding, though. No other comic book story, individual story, had stayed in publication the way Watchmen was doing and has done. Not only did Watchmen change how comic books were published, by continuing to be reprinted year after year as print runs sold out, but it changed how comic books were written. The bleak deconstruction of the superhero was financial lightning in a bottle for DC, and both DC and Marvel chased that lightning for the next 15 years, leading into the dark age of comics that I mentioned last week. Had it not been for Watchmen's existence, characters like Punisher, Lobo, Savage Dragon, even Wolverine would not have found their audience and not be as popular today as they are. You may have noticed I'm not even mentioning the story the Watchmen tells, and I'm focusing on the impact Watchmen had on the industry. This is intentional. There have been entire doctorate theses on Watchmen, which I have either read or know of. Dissecting the story is going to take more than just one video, and I don't know that I want to get into it as a series just yet. I might. But one thing that will help me make that decision is, do you already know the story of Watchmen, or even just part of it? Do you have an opinion on it, or have questions about it that I could answer in such a future video? Leave a comment down below and let me know.